Laura, it's Nick. Just checking if you can hear me.
I can hear you if I could find my unmute button. Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
All right.
So, Laura, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. McCollum, how are you?
Pretty good. How you doing?
It's Monday.
Yes,
So far, so good.
that says enough right there.
Yep. All right, I'm going to mute myself until we get started. So
Mute.
just holler if you need me.
Thanks, Laura.
No problem. I saw you hanging out in the attendee list by yourself, so I brought you up. Are Laura and Catherine coming as well?
Catherine might be joining, but I'll be doing the presentation. So
Okay. Okay. All right.
Laura had a conflict.
I'll just keep her down there unless you tell me to promote her to panelist.
I think that's fine for now.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Laura Arsenault. Just give me one more minute to deal with some IT things and I'll be right back.
Hi, this is Evelyn. I am helping Laura out this evening. She's having some technical difficulties, so we can go ahead and get started. I'm not quite sure what the initial protocol is, but
Hi, Evelyn. This is
Hi.
Lily.
Hi,
Um,
Lily.
I think we could start with the roll call. The agenda that Laura has sent starts with the roll call,
Okay,
but I don't know if you have the names of all the participants.
let me check really quick. I apologize. Okay, I believe I'm gonna have the names that I have. I'll call those out. And then just let me know if they aren't correct. So I have Mary Tracy. Is she here?
Not
Okay,
here.
not here. Okay. Andy Height.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Bob Kinzer.
He's here. I saw his name.
You see? Okay, let's see. I'll come back to him. Let's see. Elise Murray.
I'm here.
Thank you. Barbara Ward.
Here.
Glenn Fatzinger.
Glenn is not with us. Glenn is not part of this group anymore.
Anymore? Okay. If I butcher this name, I apologize. Jer Gibber.
This is Jerry. I'm here.
Jer, okay, thank you. Kay Orr.
I'm here.
Okay, Mike McGill.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, hi, Mike. Let's do Millie.
Really?
Okay. V. Lee Cutler.
Lee Cutler. That's me.
Great, thank you. Ron McCallum.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Jason Zellman.
I'm here.
Okay. And I don't know if these are all. Let's see. Donna Slaymaker.
On mute. Still on mute.
Evelyn,
Is
this is Nick from Evelyn. This is Nick Reinhardt from Supervisor Stork's office. Donna is Supervisor Stork's scheduler. She just schedules the
that's right.
appointments, so she's
Okay.
not going to be.
Okay, and then Lily.
Hi, I'm here.
Okay. Sarah. I don't know if she's.
If that's me, Sarah, yes, I'm here.
Yes, Sarah Vanish. Thank you. Laura Hughes.
She's not going to be able to join us, but she's not here.
Okay, and then Catherine Wallace.
Catherine's here, but she's as an attendee. I'm not sure if she's able to unmute herself.
I can see if I can unmute her. And then Sherry Halyard.
Here.
Okay. Is that quorum? How many do we need? That's everyone I have on my list. Is there anyone that I'm missing?
This is Robert Kinzer. I'm here.
Okay, hi Robert, thank you. Okay, and then I think the only other person was Mary Tracy.
But she said.
She said she was going to try to join virtually, I think.
Okay. Oh, hey Lori, I'm gonna turn it over to you. We just did roll call.
Thank you. This happens to me every time. I have everything set up and it shuts down on me right when the meeting starts. So I need to figure that out. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Evelyn, for stepping in. Evelyn, I'm glad you were here for backup. Evelyn's helping me tonight facilitate the meeting. We don't need really a quorum, but I'm assuming everyone's here except Ms. Tracy at this point, from what I heard from the attendance. Thank you everyone for coming. I had the agenda up, but sometimes I think that might be what the problem is with my computer, so I'm not going to put it back up. But tonight we are going to talk mostly about the changes and updates to the draft of the design guidelines. And so Sarah Vanish with EHT Traceries and Catherine, if I can promote her and she can mute herself if she needs to, but are going to give a short presentation about the changes. And then we have some discussion about the similarities and differences between the draft guidelines and the Civic Association DRC design guidelines. And we're happy to talk about any issues we have after that. So I am going to turn it over to Sarah and make her the presenter. And then she can go ahead and I will promote Catherine. All right, Sarah, you have the presentation mode.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Okay, well, thanks for having me back tonight. You all got the revised design guidelines. I was just going to walk through some of the changes and how we responded to some of the comments that we received. I'm Sarah Vonish. I'm a historic preservation specialist with EHT Traceries, working on the Holland Hills design guidelines as well as the Fairfax County design guideline updates. So Laura just went through the kind of agenda for our presentation tonight. We'll go through the updated draft and what's changed, compare the DRC and the HOD design guidelines. Major discussion topic is the recommended and not recommended photos. That was brought up in the last meeting, and we have a couple ideas for how to move forward with that. And then we'll just end with Q&A. If you have questions as we go through, feel free to let me know. All right. So just as a reminder, the purpose of the design guidelines are really to maintain, strengthen, and enhance the historic and architectural character of the potential Holland Hills HOD. They were developed as a resource to give contextual historic information and provide guidance, not to provide requirements. And the guidelines are intended to be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And those are the standards used by the ARB in their review of projects. Not intended to stunt innovative design or give case by case specific advice. The sites in Holland Hills provide unusual conditions, and in most cases, there's not a one size fits all solution to a potential project. And we just want to remind everyone that they are intended to be flexible and not be requirements. Okay, so incorporated edits. First, we received a lot of comments about the 2-column format. We've changed it to a single margin to margin text, changed the font. I hope that helps and makes it a little bit easier to read and follow the text. We emphasize the flexibility and that these are recommendations. We added some content about the various unit types within the HOD. These include discussion of the character defining features and common features of each unit type.
Did you want us to wait before we ask questions, or do you want questions along the way?
Well, if you have a question about what I just said.
I have a question for what you just covered before you move to the next one.
Okay,
but
sure.
I'll wait if that's what you prefer.
Laura, what do you prefer?
I'd rather get it said. She has Laura. Okay. Laura. Oh, she's asking Laura.
That's okay. I would say if we could wait till the end, because we might cover it, and then we'll note to come back to it. Lee, if you could just hold it to the end so we can get through it, and then we'll have plenty of time to talk at the end.
Okay, just one quick comment. It has not been commonly understood that these guidelines are not regulatory. It has not been commonly understood, and it has not been adequately conveyed. I'm not saying not by you, but by the forces who are very interested in having this project go forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome.
Okay, we covered the unit types. Recommended and not recommended photos. Still working on the format, and we'll talk about some of the photos at the end, but making sure the recommended and not recommended correspond with the text and the pages that they should. So doors, we had a lot of discussion last time about the realities of trying to find salvaged historic doors or using a fabricator. We adjusted the language to emphasize that replacement doors are possible when existing doors can't be repaired or are not appropriate for some reason. Just recommending finding a door that's compatible with the existing historic character and the character seen elsewhere in the neighborhood. We still don't recommend replacing materials, not in kind, just to be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards. But there is guidance for when you do need to replace a material or feature, what the best way to do that is. We also, after the discussion, went back to our guidelines on screened-in porches. We took out the language discouraging screening in or enclosing original porches and instead added some photos and guidance on more appropriate ways of doing that. New openings at the basement and ground level, also removed that language. Adding language recommending incorporating new openings on elevations that are not highly visible, such as the facade. Hardscaping, we went back and we still recommend the use of gravel or permeable paving for the driveways and parking pads, but we do recognize that in some instances that is not it's not a good solution for certain sites, like sites that are hilly. Instead, we just recommend using whatever is best suited to the site and the topography. The gutters, sorry, did I? Okay. Gutters, recommending low profile gutters. We got some feedback that the use of box or square gutters wasn't feasible for many homeowners. So just making sure the new gutters are low in profile and not prominent elements on these elevations. Skylights also still recommending inclusion on non-visible and non-prominent elevations, but recognizing that there are skylights and some owners might want to add skylights to their houses. So added additional language explaining what compatible yet differentiated means and what it means for Holland Hills. We added some language about the nature and quality of the materials in Holland Hills, and specifically the mid-century inexpensive and mass-produced materials that might not have stood the test of time and may require different replacement or repair strategies that other historic materials might that might not be suitable for them. So added some language differentiating decks versus porches, language about the windows, and alternative materials such as composite decking like Trex instead of replace or repair with wood decking. We also got a comment about windows with in high moisture areas such as bathrooms. Generally, that's an acceptable solution to put a vinyl window or a window material that can stand up to those conditions. All right, so some updates that weren't necessarily incorporated into this draft. We didn't include a section dedicated to the overview of how the DRC to the DRC guidelines, but we do credit the DRC with a major force behind the district's overall retention of integrity. We didn't address the process because I know that's not something, we don't know the process, and I think that's something that still needs to be figured out. Didn't remove the not recommended example photos. We think it's really important and valuable for users to have photos showing the different recommended and not recommended treatments. Again, we'll go through some potential options to make some of the houses a little less recognizable. But the photos will be, I think, useful for users of this document. We didn't remove guidelines that address elements that don't necessarily require a permit. Again, these are supposed to be intended to be comprehensive and provide guidance for users and not requirements. And we didn't remove the terms visible or primary elevation and secondary elevation because those are important elements to keep in mind when making changes to the houses, and it really is site dependent. So we kept that language in there. So for the images, I have an example of what we have in there today. So what we're proposing to do is something a little bit more graphic, something that, you know, it's a small neighborhood, and you all know the houses in the community very well. So you might be able to call out this house and know exactly what it is, but, you know, not identifying the address and making it a little bit less recognizable. We don't want this to be offensive to any homeowners. We just want to make these guidelines as useful as possible for users going forward. Here's another example of kind of detailing in on a feature, and again, removing any address numbers and making it a little bit less recognizable. So a few more edits not incorporated. We didn't remove language about removal of deteriorated materials to be consistent with the standards for rehabilitation and the standards that the ARB will be using when reviewing projects going forward. We do recommend removing only what is deteriorated, for instance, a wood panel rather than, you know, all of the wood cladding on a building. Recognizing that in some cases, the materials will be deteriorated beyond repair and will have to require wholesale replacement. I already touched on the gravel driveways. I did not remove the language discouraging painting of brick that historically has been unpainted. This is also consistent with the standards. It's usually not the best course of action to paint historically unpainted brick that might cause future maintenance issues for the brick. We kept the solar panel guidelines in there. They're just recommendations if conditions allow. I recognize that they might not be applicable in all cases, and there might be conflicts, but again, they're just best practices and recommendations. And same goes with landscaping. There's a general landscape character that you can see in the neighborhood, and just provided an overview of the landscape designs and character without making recommendations or requirements for how that landscaping is addressed going forward, but recommendations for preserving the character. So some edits that we haven't made yet, but will be made in future drafts: updated maps, an inclusion of final contributing and non-contributing properties, recognizing that this will be finalized later on and can be incorporated into the design guidelines once they're finalized. A maintenance checklist for homeowners, still have that to move forward. The updated visual presentation of not recommended photographs that we'll discuss tonight, and additional site photographs and images of specific features. We'll be making another site visit to get some additional images to help explain some of these concepts and recommendations. So I have a comparison of the DRC and draft HOD design guidelines. Laura, do you want me to walk through these? Or?
I would say let's go back. There's a lot of information in the previous one. Yeah. So let's go back, and I'm thinking part of this might come out in our discussion, and then you can pull it up. But if you could go back to the beginning of your presentation, and then we can start answering questions as we go through, because there was so much in here. I want to make sure that, you know, we're on the related material when we ask those specific questions. So Lee, I'm happy, and I'm not going to do free for all, but if you could raise your hand, there's a raise your hand feature, and Nick, you can obviously, you know, pipe in when someone in your office has a question, but if you could raise your hand, and then we'll try to organize it like that if you have any questions on that specific slide. So Lee, I know you had a question at the beginning, so we can go ahead and start with you on this one.
Implication that it's commonly understood the guidelines are not in this actual text here. The guidelines for rehabilitation historic buildings and guidelines on sustainability for rehabilitating historic buildings, which assist in applying the standards, are advisory. And the Secretary of Standards for Rehabilitation, codified as 36 CFR 67, are regulatory, okay, for the Historic Preservation Tax Incentives Program. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not clear, and that's not understood by the common homeowner and all homeowners. This information was never delivered, or you tell me where it was delivered, by the Friends, who were the educators for this project, or the people who designed that survey that supposedly convinced the supervisor, the petition, that all of the people, or a majority of people, were on board with this, when they didn't even have this definition of what it is. So how can we go forward with this project if people don't understand this to be the case? And
So
they
the
think that it's going to be something they could be penalized for, okay, if they don't step into marching orders.
So the Secretary of Interior Standards is for National Register properties, and it's a best practices guide for the historic preservation field. So that's what we're using as guidance for this. But as you stated in there, the tax incentives, that's where it's a regulatory for the tax incentives part. And Sarah, please jump in, because I think you're a little bit more familiar than me. But that's where it's the regulatory. For us, this is advisory and best practices material, and that's why we're incorporating those standards into the guidelines. And once again, these are recommendations and guidelines, and they're called design guidelines. They're not, these set of documents is not going to be approved by the Board of Supervisors or by the Planning Commission. It's going to be approved by the ARB, who use them as tools to help guide them in their process and as homeowners to help make decisions. So that's where the difference is. These are not regulatory in any way.
Well, that is very nice of you to clarify. It needs to be clarified to the 450 odd homeowners in Holland Hills. It never has been. It's never been clarified that their ability to make decisions over their own pocketbook on their own property remains for them to do.
Right. So that will be the next thing we're planning to have in January, February. When we started this, seems like forever ago now. No, it's not. No, it's not, because these design guidelines will not be approved until after, if the HOD gets adopted. They're going to be in flux and in discussion until we finish this process, and then the ARB might have different guidelines or edits they'd like to add after, or if the HOD is approved. So
well,
the whole point.
Moving on to discussing the DRC guidelines. All right, would you please discuss the portion of the DRC guidelines that threatens people with legal action if they don't obey?
That is not part of our process. That's a completely separate private process that we cannot control or comment on.
Okay.
We are commenting on the Historic Overlay District draft design guidelines. We cannot comment on the DRC guidelines. The point of doing the discussion of the DRC design guidelines is to point out the similarities and differences to help gain a better understanding and to see kind of, to ensure the community values were in there if we needed them to be. However, the whole point, as we stated last week, was to not take the DRC guidelines and just adopt them wholeheartedly, which is why we're going through this process. But you are correct. These are recommendations. We didn't have a community meeting when we had traceries on board with us and didn't have the design guidelines in process at that point, which is why it's probably not clear. But we wanted to run it through the work group and get some buy-in from the work group on these potential design guidelines before we brought it to the full community, because the work group is supposed to be a small representation of the community. So we'll be discussing that further at the meeting in January, February.
Thank you for your fine work.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Laura,
Yes.
can I just follow up on that briefly? It seems to me that it's pretty clear that the DRC guidelines are very important to the county, because you've capitulated on a significant piece of the Secretary of Interior standards in number 9, where it says the new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with massing, size, etc. And it also goes, excuse me, goes on to say that if the new work, an addition, were torn down, it would be clearly recognizable as different from the original structure. And it seems to me that there's been a lot of movement in that area, and because of some of the reaction, or much of the reaction in the last meeting, where people were horrified that you hadn't simply adopted the DRC guidelines to make every addition and every change to the house absolutely identical, so that it was seamless and unrecognizable as an addition.
Right.
The standards, the Secretary of Interior standards say it should be recognizable. And now it seems to have moved a lot more toward the DRC.
I just want to say that the standards are a holistic way of reviewing the project, and when in the situation of tax credits, how the National Park Service reviews projects. But the differentiated, we still recommend compatible yet differentiated. And it's not to mean that you can't have a new addition that works with the existing massing and existing footprint, just using subtle design aspects or cues to differentiate the original versus the proposed. So, I mean, we're still recommending a compatible yet differentiated approach, but recognizing that the modernist character of the neighborhood is an important aspect, and we don't want anything that doesn't fit within that character.
And I hear you, but you used a key word, and that was the modernist character. This community, relative to your traditional historic properties, is new. Relative to buildings like what you're working on now at River Farms, and many of the other 13 other historic properties are very, very, very old. And that's what these standards are intended to address. And I think therein lies the problem. This is not historic in the true sense. It's just different. Different than, but not that different from Homes Run or some communities in Maryland that I'm familiar with. They're just, they're old by our standards, but they're not historically old.
Millie, the threshold of general practice for standards is 50 years or older. So I recognize that while some of the community is 1971, 1972, we're already at 50 years by 1970. So by that threshold, we could say they meet that standard of the 50 years or older.
And how many other HODs in Fairfax County are only 50 years old?
Lake Ann and Reston.
That's one that I
I
know.
would just say the standards are really used throughout the country. I used to live in Los Angeles and San Diego. I worked on a lot of mid-century communities. The standards are used in California as well. Catherine used to live in San Francisco. So it's not making specific requirements. It's just general design standards and principles for achieving compatibility. And that's still the goal with Holland Hills, even though it is a different character and aesthetic, the same principles still apply. And they're used in other communities as well.
I will say too, one of the criteria for the National Register, which I think Holland Hills was nominated under, was criterion G, which is exceptional and not 50 years old as well. So there is some exception to that rule. And the National Park Service is the one that makes the threshold for the determination. So it's not just, us saying that 50 years is, noteworthy or historic. And there's varying degrees of historic. We have a whole study in Reston right now that's between 1970 and 1990. Basically, anything that we think of significance in that area. So it's not just the traditional term of historic. It's ever evolving.
So can I dive in on this? This is Mike McGill. Can you hear me?
Hold on, Mr. McGill. Can you hold on one second? Elise,
Sure.
Did you have a question? And I think Elise had a question about finding your raise your hand button.
I did, And Veronica told me to find it, that I could find it on my participants box. I think when we started out at day one, these meetings used to be on my screen. But I don't have any questions. I was just asking as an academic.
Okay. All right, thanks. I just wanted to touch base. I know you had been chatting, so thank you. Okay, Mr. McGill, if you want to go ahead.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Trace Reeves because I think your revisions have made this a much better document. You certainly responded to all of my concerns. And I think you've done a good job of achieving a balance between forces that want to simply replicate every single edition, making it look like all the original work, and those who, like me, who are saying new editions can be different as long as they're mid-century modern and compatible with the original massing and features of the buildings. I do have a concern that I want to raise. I'm not clear if this was in the last version, but in this version, I was surprised and dismayed to see a sentence on page 8 that basically says the Holland Hills subdivision consists of 22 separate subdivisions, each with its own design covenants. And I think this is at least inaccurate, and furthermore is irrelevant to the thrust and nature of your report and should be deleted. Now, first, the inaccuracies. Holland Hills was approved as a subdivision, and it was divided into 22 sections, each of which was developed sequentially. In most cases, the design covenants in those sections are identical. The differences apparently occur for those sections where the community has publicly owned or community-owned land. The last two were somewhat different, but they're still consistent with the overall thrust of the design guidelines. So that's a distinction without a difference, and it doesn't contribute to an understanding of the nature of the Holland Hills neighborhood, which is, as a neighborhood and as an integrated subdivision, is on the National Register of Historic Places and is recognized in Fairfax County as a historic district. So I think this sentence should be deleted.
Yeah, we can go back and look at that. It clearly is not saying what we want to say. We know the Holland Hills neighborhood is cohesive, so not a problem. We'll do that.
Excuse me. I have a point to make on that. First of all, Mr. McGill, with all due respect, happens to think he knows the history of Holland Hills, but he does not. Holland Hills was not designed initially as a community or a development of 22 subdivisions. It evolved as Davenport got funding from different sources and sold every house in each section. It's very important distinction that each section, 22 of them, are distinctly, they are different from one to the other. They are different topographically, they are different in the number of homes in them, and it's a legal, and their own attorney for the Friends of Holland Hills has made this distinction. It is a legal distinction, and you must keep that in there because it's very important and very accurate. And I applaud you for including it because too many people want to say that Holland Hills is like a planned community or development, and it started out saying, oh, we're going to have 22 subdivisions. No, they evolved one by one. He didn't even know if he was going to finish. It stopped at the top of Rebecca Drive for a long time until it continued. So as they built it, it was kind of like, if we build it, they will come. If we sell them, we will continue to build. And that's the way it evolved. And so what you've got in here is accurate.
So you're describing,
Mr. McGill. Hold on one second, Mr. McGill, hold on one second, please. I will say that the deed and sections of the neighborhood are not enforceable by the county, the differences between them. So we're getting back to a private issue that the county can enforce. We're looking at Holland Hills as a whole, and it's a complete evolution of development, which is why this period of significance ranges from 47 to 71, because we're taking into account the evolution of the development. And I really, for effort of time and discussion, I really don't want to get into too much of that because we are not going to be addressing that in a large part of the design guidelines. I think Mr. McCallum had a question.
Simply wanted to second Mike's comments. If any word is to be in there at all, it should be section substituted for subdivision. But I would also support the notion that the entire sentence should be struck from the guidelines. Ms. Cutler, of course, has been in a lawsuit, and she has a position which is trying to re-argue some points that were in the lawsuit, and I think that's not appropriate. I think what's appropriate is just the accuracy of what's in these guidelines, not any concern about some tangential lawsuit that she may be interested in. In this particular case, the appropriate word would be sections, not subdivisions. Thank you. No further comment.
Thank you, Mr. McCallum. I think we can definitely address that in the sentence, and we can clarify and update it to report to reflect what the existing facts. And I think the subdivision kind of threw a lot of people off, so we will fix that very easily and clarify that section. But once again, we will not be able to address those private issues with the deed, specifically with this historic overlay district or the design guidelines.
Laura, before you so quickly agreed to change that, you might ask the county attorney to check what the deeds, each of our deeds says. You refer to as subdivision, not section. They're used interchangeably from time to time in discussion, but legally it is a subdivision.
Thank you, Millie. I will consult with her. Thank you. Were there any other questions or comments on this page specifically? I'm not seeing anybody kind of or wave your hand at me, but I don't see any in the comment box. Okay. So we can go through some of those edits if anybody wants to kind of chime in.
I'll just flip through until someone interrupts me.
Let me just go through, Sarah, if you don't mind. I'll just kind of highlight them, if that's okay. Just highlight them. So we're talking about the guidelines and recommendations. We're re-emphasizing that again to Lee's point. And we've changed the formatting, which is good. And then go ahead, Sarah, to the next one. And then is there any questions or comments about the various unit types? We added some photos in there to help clarify which unit types were which, and hopefully that helps with the visual understanding of what changes could be made to these structures. I'm gonna just wait 1 second. Oh, Mary, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Ms. Tracy, sorry.
On the types, the type 1, you have 2003 Bedford Lane, and I would note that one, that's not the original house on there, that's got an addition on it. Plus the other thing is, that house was changed totally without the DRC's approval. I think I'd use another house for that. Of that model. I don't see a difference between that and the type 1B or whatever the next one is. But that is not the original house there.
We can look at another example.
Thank you.
Okay. Should I keep going?
Yeah, I'm just kind of scrolling through and seeing if anyone had any chat messages or waving their hand, but I don't see anyone. So please go ahead.
Okay.
Let's talk about the recommended and the not recommended. I want to hear from you all. And Sarah, maybe go to the next page. Yeah, that one. Yeah, those. See what your comments are on those kind of renderings. Barbara's raising her hand. Hold on.
I applaud the use of pictures. I have to say, with respect in particular to the house that's on the screen right now at the bottom right, that will never, everybody knows that should not have happened. And pointing to that house is really unnecessary. It's so distinctive. Everybody knows what house it is. I do like the idea of masking or doing by drawing some of the windows where, you know, very heavy cladding has been used around the windows. If we can do that in a way that doesn't show what house it is, it's good. We really don't want, the house at the that's on the screen now at the bottom right, that's not a Goodman house. That house was built in the mid-60s or later, or the 70s. It was not, though, a Goodman house. It was built and developed late, outside of the Davenport Goodman time, and it was separately built. It's never been, it's never pretended to be a Goodman house. And so using that house as for anything is not helpful. I do understand that the reason you used it is because of the reflective windows on there. Again, that's not a house. That house is distinctive. They are neighbors, and I really don't like, and I feel uncomfortable with, as I think many other people do, pointing to particular houses that are so clearly identifiable and putting a big X on the house. That's really going to cause problems in the neighborhood, and we're not out to cause problems. We're out to get people's support, and putting an X on people's houses is not going to get us support. So,
would it help if we removed the X?
For example, if we used, if with respect to the picture in the middle, if you could crop that picture and just show the middle part windows, which is what you're showing, what you're talking about there, because where they have the horizontal cladding of the boards, that those windows there have very thick frames. So couldn't we just show that? Don't show the rest of the house. Just show that one part. And that, again, you know, that could be any one of a number of houses. So if you really try to cut these down to eliminate or do drawings, I really like the idea of drawings. But if you wanted to show this, do not use these type of windows with the heavy framing, then just show the part of the house with the heavy framing, which is that top part of the house, and eliminate from the picture the rest of it.
I think it's important, Barbara. I understand the houses are very distinct and unique, and you'll be able to call out like the East End Cross Edition one on the last page. But we're kind of at this point where these things are existing. We're not asking anyone to change them from what they are now. We're just saying, moving forward, we do not recommend X, Y, and Z. And so I think there needs to be a happy balance of, context of where these, like where the drawings are. But I mean, it's going to be very difficult to not call out a specific house because they're all so unique, and you all drive in the neighborhood all the time. So it's going to be very hard for us to say, don't do this East End Cross, addition on this house, but go ahead and do the windows or whatnot. So I'm not sure how to kind of, and I understand both sides. I just don't know how to kind of fix it, because you want to make sure we give concrete examples to people in the neighborhood to show them what we do and we don't want. And the best way to do that is to give examples of what is out there right now.
Right, and you could do that with the picture in the middle that's now up on the screen. If you just showed the top part there, you don't need to show the rest of the house. crop that out and just show the top part.
Okay. I mean, we can work on that, but I think too, there's a happy medium of, how do we give it a little bit of context, because otherwise if we just show the exact, piece of it, we can work on it. And of course, we'll come back for more.
I would rather see more pictures of affirmatively what you are looking for than don't let this happen to you. There are, if you want to emphasize the fact that the encasement of windows needs to be narrow and thin, you can show lots of windows in Holland Hills which have narrow, thin encasements around them. And people get the idea. I mean, we're not so dense that we don't understand that a thick surround doesn't work.
Sarah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the cases have one recommended and one not for each example. Is that kind of how we're setting it up?
Sometimes there are more than one, so there's no consistent rule there. Cropping the images for specific building features will be easy to accomplish. The more difficult pictures will be about sighting and massing. But maybe that's where there's a little bit of a happy medium, where there's a few pictures in those sections, but we'll try to limit it to cropped images.
And Mr. Height brought up a question, thank you for putting in the chat, about the photo filter in the middle makes it hard to notice kind of what's wrong with the windows. And that's a good point too. And maybe it's just a matter of, using a different filter, but it's just hard to tell with that one. The one on the right obviously shows a little bit better about the reflective windows. But I think to this point, if we kind of zoom in and crop, we should be able, the East and Cross ones are going to stick out like a sore thumb anyway. But yes, if we could zoom in on that and we can take that into account.
And we put together these examples just for the purposes of discussion. This is a bad filter to use to show the windows. So there's another one that we could definitely use.
Okay, Miss Tracy, I see your hand raised.
I just sort of have a question. What exactly is the objection to the third one there? You keep talking about reflective windows, but this house has reflective windows. I don't see that's, it may not be a Goodman house, but it seems to fit into the general idea of what Holland Hills is.
It was more targeted to the addition of highly tinted screens on windows. It's like a mirror kind of tint on that house.
Okay, I'm sorry. It doesn't show. Okay. All right, thank you. That's reasonable.
Mr. McCallum, I see your hand.
Just for the record here, I did not understand that the issue with that third house was reflective windows. I just didn't know that was the purpose of it. If there's some narrative that goes along with it, that explains, lets the reader understand, great looking house, but the wrong kind of windows. And the middle one too, I really had no idea what the problem was without a narrative statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCollum. I think these were just for purpose of examples to show what the pictures and filters are that we're looking at. I think in the narrative we have that. Is that correct, Sarah?
There are captions associated with the images, so there is some narrative that is associated with them.
Okay.
I'm just got a quick question. Reflective windows, is that like a solar treatment on there to try to insulate better or to try to cut down on heating and cooling bills? What's the purpose of that? I never noticed them before. I'm just curious. I thought it was like something to try to control the high heating and cooling bills because the windows are so vast. Is that what it's for?
It could have been that or glare from sunlight. I'm not really sure in this instance. There are clear coatings that and films that can be added that don't change the appearance of the windows so dramatically. In this instance, it's like a mirror that you're looking right back at yourself.
You know, I guess some people think that everyone has memorized every house in Holland Hills. I have no idea where that is. It just doesn't sound like a bad idea. It's just curious.
You have added a new sentence, and I thank you for it, about windows on page 62, where you allow low emissibility coating is acceptable. I have that on a couple of windows in my house, and you really, it's nothing like, and that's done because that that increases the R value, which evidently makes it the room warmer. Beyond that, my technical expertise is at an end, but the film that they use on these windows to increase the R value and keep the room warmer because the windows are thicker and so forth is nothing like the almost mirror image on those windows in that house at the lower right hand corner. That's an entirely different thing.
I don't mean to call out Miss Orr, but I know Miss Orr is an architect and she might be able to shed some light. She's on the architectural review board. Miss Orr, are you around and maybe able to enlighten us on the window coatings?
Y'all have said kind of everything. The reflectivity is a whole different issue that doesn't need to be, they're reflecting the sun from coming in. They're trying to keep it out of their home. But the fact that it doesn't fit in the community, there's other ways of doing that. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to call you out.
Okay, I'm gonna just go back. All right. So this page talked about the doors, openings, and porches. Were there any questions or comments that anyone had?
I had a question about doors. Let me see. I'm sorry. What pages is the discussion of doors at?
57 to 59.
Oh, okay. What is a divided light door?
Divided light, so like a 6/6 window you'd see in a colonial revival house. So if a door had a glazed opening with divided lights, much different than the character of Holland Hills, but it has individual panes of glass and muntins. Obviously, the newer doors just have a muntins usually applied to them. So that's a divided light door in that instance.
I'm not sure I understand that. We have a number of people in Holland Hills have added doors that either have a clear front to them. They're very simple, but the front door is now glass to let more light into the house, or they've gone to doors that have perhaps are modern, mid-century modern doors, but they have like maybe 2 openings or for glass. Is that what a divided light door is?
I think I might need to see an example of what you mean. We did add in the guidelines.
I'll take a picture of one and send it to Laura.
Okay. But I can't imagine some new doors would be installed in the neighborhood with the divided light. I think that we're talking about in the guidelines. We did add some additional photos of doors, including glazed doors with a glass pane in the middle, glass panel in the middle, in response to the comments that we received.
Okay.
Barbara,
Also, you use the word sort of porches versus I understand porch, that's something that's covered. I understand deck, but you also would want to use the word patio. Is there a difference between the term patio and porch? Or what is a patio versus a porch?
We did add some language on the differences between the types that are discussed. I'd have to go back and get the page number unless Catherine knows it off the top of her head. But we did add some
page
additional.
57, on entrances, porches, and decks, you define a porch as having a roof. And then you say many original porches have been enclosed. But then at some point later on, you use the word patio, and but you don't provide any definition for the term patio.
I think that might have been added to the glossary.
Yes, Barbara, this is Catherine, and all of the terms have been added to the glossary, but we can define patio in the text as well. I think we were talking about decks as more of a constructed feature that might be floating a bit off the ground, whereas a patio is at ground level, and it would typically be where the sliding glass door is open on the rear of a house.
I know what you mean by that. I understand.
I would say too, this is Laura. I would say too, we want to make sure those definitions are consistent with what the county recognizes and their definitions of patios and decks and porches, just because we don't want to run afoul of different definitions in different places. So I think they're all in the same and consistent, but we just want to make sure we'll verify that. But the patio is the at grade modification, like a stone patio, that type of thing. And then the porch and the deck are usually more similar, but yeah, we can clarify those definitions.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that had questions for that one? All right.
Who has a question, Laura?
Yeah,
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Lee.
yeah, just on the bottom paragraph, new openings, incorporating new openings, let's see, discouraging basement ground level openings or changing a window to a door, right? Is a permit required if you want to change your door to a window or your window to a door?
I think it depends on the amount of work that's done, Lee. I'm not sure the exact threshold of what amount of change. I think if you're starting to remove an exterior wall, that requires a permit, but I think there's some threshold for the amount of change, and I can look it up or inquire if you'd like for that clarification.
Okay, I guess I was thinking something like, better access for the handicap, to get in and out if there's a wall of windows and
Right.
we put an unseeable door in there. Okay.
Right. I just don't know. I'm pretty sure if you start moving that stuff around and changing, wall openings and stuff, that would rise to the level of a permit, but I'll definitely check.
Yeah, in lieu of the way that our windows are, I mean, there was a whole wall of windows, and so,
Right.
it's different, taking out the structural beams and stuff. Okay,
Right. I'll check. I'll make a note to follow up.
thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Doorbell? Church.
See, any other questions on that one? Sarah, I think we can move ahead.
Landscaping, gutters, skylights. Okay. I'm not hearing anyone, so I'll keep going. We talked about the compatible yet differentiated a little bit earlier. The nature and quality of the materials used on Holland Hills houses. Talked about decks and porches. Some additional info on the windows and discussion of alternative materials such as composite decking. Mr. Height, I see. Okay.
For me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted, it's in the same section since it says 71, but I'm on page 77 of the guide, and it talks about the T111 siding, but I don't think the sample photo at the top, photo number 1, is the actual T111. It's the wider version, which I think is the Hardy plank that looks like T111.
Thanks. We will look at that. We are going out and getting some additional photos of some of these features. So we should have some more material in the next one, but thank you for identifying that.
Yeah, and if you need samples of the old T111 versus the new T111, you can use my house because the back of it has a replacement panel. So you have the new T111 right next to old T111. So
that's
you can put
really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, you can put a big X on it too.
I'll have to get your address from Laura, and we'll have to note that next time we go out.
Is there a problem with using Hardy plank that looks like T111? That's something that's durable and you don't have to worry about rotting and termites and things like that? What's the problem with that?
The only issue with DRC had with when I was there is that it's not the same proportion. So it's not the 4-inch wide. It's like 6-inch wide. So if you look at the sample on page 77, there are wider gaps. It actually, I prefer it. I like it, but it doesn't look like the T111.
Well, it's just, I don't know why we're stuck in 1950 materials when they're crappy and they don't hold up and they rot and they attract termites. That just seems counterproductive. Nobody in their right mind would want to do that.
That's why we.
Hardy plank, why wouldn't you?
And the concern that Mr. Height just brought up is that you're changing the look and appearance of a major element of the houses that you're in. So that would be a problem moving forward. Not saying that it can't happen or, and this is why these are recommendations. These are not saying you can't use Hardy plank if it's appropriate, or if all the siding's gone and you need to put up something new, or if you need to use Trex on your deck because it lasts longer. I mean, there's, arguments and justifications you can make, but these are just guiding principles to kind of inform the decisions. I think some of the exercises we did last week, where the daycare had Trex on their new wooden deck. I mean, that was a perfect example of the kind of, if you can justify why you need it, the ARB will take that into consideration. It's just a starting point in guiding. And we talk about in kind, we want you to replace it in kind if you can, but if the materials don't exist anymore, then, we can't force that to happen. And the ultimate goal is for the preservation of the house. So that's the ultimate goal. And that's what the ARB, Architecture Review Board, when they're weighing these decisions, that's what they're ultimately weighing. So that's when that comes into play.
It just seems inconsistent with what some of the houses you said are contributing, who have outrageous additions or towers and things that don't look anything like original Holland Hills houses, don't look in any way like a historic Holland Hills house. And they're okay, but putting decent materials that are guaranteed for a lifetime is not okay when it looks very similar. I think it's really a subjective and inconsistent application of
the very nature of the design guidelines are subjectivity. Architecture is subjective, and we're trying to find and navigate a very gray area of how to preserve the houses and make sure they're livable and ensure that their character is maintained. So that's, the whole point of why we're here. But Mr. McCollum, I think did you have your hand up? Sorry, I can't see on my screen. Okay, go ahead.
Pretty much answered my concern, but
in South Carolina, where we have one also.
Somebody else, what's going on?
Go ahead. It's just I have to mute everybody when we're not talking, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. The language that says specifying wood frame fixed windows versus steel. We had a tree fall on our house in 2013, and we had to replace door and the adjoining windows and so on. And the builder used a material that is not wood, but it is paintable, and it was painted. And there's no way in the world looking at that would anybody say it's different from the rest of the houses. So my concern is just the specificity of using the term wood frame windows. If there's some way my situation that I described could be incorporated in the narrative, that would be helpful, I think.
And Sarah, you can echo me on this if you feel, but part of it is that we're not trying to limit what new technology comes out, like the solar panel example that Sarah left in. If there's new technology that comes out that makes those windows look exactly like the wood that was there and keeps them in character, I don't think we're necessarily against that. I think it's just we would like to preserve it if we can, but understanding there's better methods and ways moving forward with technology that we can't obviously address in this, every example of every possible technology that's coming down the road. But if you came and presented that to the ARB, for example, they would take that into consideration. And usually we ask for materials, samples, and colors when you come before the ARB. We're not doing it right now because we're virtual, but we would ask that you come in and show us. So we, try to make the paint color match, things like that, brick and mortar, we're trying to make those match. So all that would come in. So I don't necessarily think that your example, Mr. McCallum, would not be allowed. I think it's just a matter of proving that it still meets within the consideration, the significance, and the characteristics of the district.
Well, just to add to that, back in the day when I was a real lawyer, I always took the position that if you can say you mean something, you can put it into words. So if you mean that what the situation I described is okay, and you should be able to put it in words somehow.
I'll go back to that section. I think the general guidance is if there's an alternative material that can replicate the characteristics of the historic appearance and material, then it's generally acceptable. In cases where a material, for instance, vinyl, can't necessarily replicate those features to avoid those materials. But I'll take a look again at what the exact language we have in there is.
If that's in there, that makes me happy.
I will say too, Mr. McCallum, that would be a determination that the ARB would have to make with these guidelines as their starting point. So they would take these guidelines and you would come in and say, kind of argue your case or why you need this different material. They would take that into consideration and make their decision. So a lot of it is in their interpretation and justification of these guidelines. But I do agree in that if we can put clarification in there of alternate materials, that's fine. Go ahead.
If it's in some other spot, as I think Sarah was saying, that's fine.
Okay.
No problem.
Thank you. Maybe we need to say it a couple more times just for clarity.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Should I go, or is there another?
I was trying to see if there's anyone else that had a comment. Okay. Let's see. All right, we can go ahead and move forward.
Can I raise my hand?
Sure, Barbara, go ahead.
In the section on size, scale, and massing, I really think that this is a much better approach. I just want to make sure that I understand what it is you're saying. At one point you say that you do not, new construction that appears to be historistic, HISTORICIST. That's not recommended. What does that mean?
Historicist, and maybe we can find an alternative word, but an addition that attempts to, if there's like one Holland Hills house and the new owner wants to replicate a different Holland Hills house and use that as the design point, it would be trying to replicate another historic design without taking into consideration the design and the current historic fabric. Does that make sense?
This is Mike McGill. I think I can make more sense of this question.
Okay.
We don't want colonial revival additions in Holland Hills. Colonial revival is a historicist style of architecture harking back to the past. We don't want Tudor. We don't want Italian Eastlake. Okay?
And then one other thing is that you say that new construction should be physically and visually separate the addition from the historic building. What do you mean by that? How does that mean if I put an additional bedroom or a family room on the back of my house, I somehow have to put a breezeway to that? How do I physically and visually separate it from my house?
That's not the intention of that guidance. It's more to recommend thoughtful additions and new construction that are deferential to the original built form and fabric.
So Barbara, sorry, I'll jump in. Some of the examples that we have are, different roof lines, different colors, different materials, a different kind of setback or something like that. And we're talking about the size, scale, and massing. You want it to, we talk about that key term, that compatible but different, which is clear as mud and open to interpretation. But sorry. So the historic nature is you want to make sure that you have some sort of differentiation or setback. So for one example, my team and I went out and looked at the different things in the neighborhood. We could tell clearly where the nature is or where the change is, because you don't want to have something. You want it to be compatible. So size, scale, or color, but then you want it to want to be able to tell that there's a difference. So like I said, we've seen that with roof lines, windows, window placements, things like that, that it has some sort of acknowledgement to the original house, but that you can tell that it's a different, an addition to the original. I know, clear as mud, but
you're right.
So I think though that this is one of those that when the ARB comes in to kind of analyze it, it gets, all the houses are so unique and so different. You would come in with your proposal and say, okay, this is what I want. This is how I'm trying to make it different or the same. And then they would comment on that, saying, okay, well, the roof line's too high, or the materials is completely off for the district. Like if you want to do stone, there's no stone and but but something like that where they're saying, so there's a kind of a little bit of mitigation in their professional opinion on how they think it's compatible but different.
Okay, I don't want to beat this dog anymore.
I'm trying to find, and I can go look to find some examples in the neighborhood to try to give a better kind of idea of this compatible but different, or in other historic overlay districts, so you can see that.
I would like to see some pictures of houses in the neighborhood that it would be helpful just to the committee and to our sense of what we are looking at to understand what's in your mind. And if you could find something in the, in Holland Hills that you think is compatible but different enough, because if not, then we should know that.
Mm-hmm. Right, and maybe we can put, and Sarah, I don't know if the specific section has recommended and not recommended parts to it, but maybe we can just add some more examples, because sometimes with some of these, you need like 4 or 5 examples to gain a gist of kind of where we're thinking of where we're going. But Sarah and I, Tracers and my group will work on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Trying to see if Nick, does your group have any comments? I see Lee raising her hand.
Okay, I might get you out of sequence here, but bullet number 4, please explain what that means to me. What is a primary elevation and secondary elevation? Okay, what does that mean? I just
Sure.
don't know.
I don't have the page number that provides that explanation offhand, but a primary elevation would be the front elevation where your front entry door is, or the front elevation that faces the street, the wall of the building that faces the street. The secondary elevation usually is the side or the rear. In the case of Holland Hills, obviously there are a lot of views that make secondary elevations more visible. Obviously, the primary elevation is the most important, and that's where we recommend additions or alterations not be located. Does that explain it?
Well, not really.
So the
Does it
primary-
depend on the viewpoint in the season, whether the leaves are I'm having trouble. And I'm reminded of an issue I had years ago with the requirement for providing elevation statistics for a shed. And my surveyor didn't even know what it meant. So I thought maybe you could clarify it, so in my own mind I'd have a better picture of what this
So
is.
the primary elevation to me is the front elevation, are the ones that are most visible from, like, for Lee, your house would be Rebecca Drive. So you actually have two.
Are you saying the front view?
Yeah.
Yes,
Elevation
looking towards,
means
looking
something
towards your.
In this case, it doesn't.
Okay.
So
All right,
to your.
elevation doesn't mean what I know it to mean.
So elevate, it can be used. Yeah, so elevation, you have a front, side, rear, a front, two side elevations and a rear, if you're doing strictly architectural terms.
If you get a
But so we could say, for example, for your house, Lee, you're looking at it from Rebecca Drive, you have two visible elevations from Rebecca Drive. You know, you have your front and then you have the side with the windows, correct? Depending on where you're standing on Rebecca Drive. So those would be visible primary elevations. I would say the word prominent elevations, you know, visible prominent elevations from the public right of way. Okay. And then your secondary elevations would be your rear and the other side of your house.
Okay.
Yeah, so elevation doesn't
Okay.
mean.
Thank you very much.
Can I
Okay.
make one of the, this is out of sequence, but, and I don't know where in the presentation by the consultant this fell, but I was struck by it and I thought, my goodness, she said something like landscape, there is a general landscape or a consistent landscape character to homes in Holland Hills. And I do a lot of walking in the community, and I've been around the community myself about 35 years, and I will, if you had a gun to my head, and let's not talk about guns, but if you did, I could not tell you what the typical character of landscaping in Holland Hills is, unless maybe I said, just let it go wild. Because so many people have completely unkept yards. Some people have very structured yards. Some people have something in between. Some people have grass. Many people don't. A lot of people have ivy that they cultivate on their whole.
Don't forget about the bamboo. Don't forget about
and
the bamboo.
Oh my God, the bamboo forest. So what is the typical landscape of Holland Hills?
So I will say the landscape, and Sarah, feel free, I'm not meaning to jump in over it, but the landscape of Holland Hills is almost as unique as the houses are, except for the fact that they were supposed to work with the houses and create view sheds. Now, granted, the landscape that was there when it was originally there is very limited to what's existing there now. You know, the trees have matured and everything like that. However, there are landscape features. For example, and when you think of landscape, it's not just the trees and the bushes. You're talking about, you know, the landscape features as well. Like half of Holland Hills has a curb and gutter and the other half does not. You know, half of the view shed between the houses is just as important as the houses are sited, and the landscaping was built in certain places to help for privacy. So it's a very integral part to it. Not saying that each lot is exactly the same in any way, shape, or form, or they're all maintained to that certain degree. So if you're looking, for example, of, and the A or B members on board, feel free to jump in as well. But if you're looking of how like a landscaping example would be taken to the A or B, if you were coming in for your addition and your neighbor was very close to where you're putting your addition, we might recommend putting in some trees or preserving existing trees or something like that to help kind of mitigate the effect of your addition on your neighbors. So that's how the kind of, we're taking it from kind of conception of what it kind of could be, and then taking that once again as guidelines and building that into how we would move forward and mitigate your proposed addition on the impact of your neighbors.
Okay.
Does that make
Well,
sense?
It was, yes, it does, now that you've explained it, but the characterization was just kind of bizarre, because there is no typical landscape in Holland Hills. Not that I'm
Like I
aware
said,
of.
the landscape is unique as the houses. You know, finding common elements in some of the houses has been proven difficult as well. So, but yeah, we're trying to just give general, even in any neighborhood, you're never going to find the exact same types of landscaping or things like that. We also do have a landscape architect on the architectural review board, so can speak to trees that would best survive in certain areas and trees that are native to the neighborhood and things like that that could comment on that. So,
But there are some neighborhoods like Villamay, which is right across the street from us, that where they do have, I mean, you can kind of in your head visualize, oh yeah, they all look, you know, they have different
Right.
characteristics, but they all look basically similar.
Correct.
I might have misspoke when I said that, but you know, they all have topography and, you know, a general site design character. So I think that's more what I meant, but
Okay, I was
Yeah,
just curious.
the landscaping, when we usually group like site plan and landscaping. So, you know, you're looking at the entire site area and the relativity and view sheds and things like that. And that's when usually the landscape, we talk more about that than just the specific, you know, flora, fauna things that are there. But I understand your point.
The
We can
site plan,
clarify that.
yes. The site plan is fairly consistent, and the way they're shaped differently, and they're not all in a row. Yeah, I can see that.
The landscaping is easily movable and changed. I mean, other than the big, you know, trees, but you know, it can be changed per lot. So.
Not easy to move the house, yeah. Thanks, Laura.
Yep.
I think they should leave the house in.
I think we hopefully have some guidance on that. And then
I have one other question about carports.
Sure.
On page 85, you, under not recommended, enclosing a carport. Most are not original. Most of the carports are pretty recent in Holland Hills. Also, if what they are proposing to do is compatible, I don't understand what the reluctance is about giving up a carport.
I think, well, there are some early carports, and they're a historic feature that demonstrates the period of time when Holland Hills was built. Again, these are recommendations, so maybe not the first recommendation, but there are ways to enclose the carport in a manner that is compatible. So while it's not recommended, it's not out of the
it's not prohibited.
Possibility. Yeah, it's not prohibited.
It's not prohibited. And I will say all carports are not created equal. So, you know, there's some carports that are better than others. But once again, as Sarah mentioned, we understand that the homes in Holland Hills are very small. And, you know, if you needed to enclose it for whatever purpose you would like, you know, that would be something that we'd have to take into consideration. Be the same as basically adding an addition, but the carports are usually on a prominent elevation. And once again, we're not saying you can't do it. It's just saying we need to have the extra review on it and comment on it in order to keep the character of the district.
Okay.
Is there anything else on this one? Painting bricks or we talked about the landscape guidance with milling. We just brought that up. Okay. Is there anything else? Anything about the gravel driveways that anyone wanted to bring up? Once again, these are not prohibiting any changes, but recommendations on what we would think would be consistent. Okay. Sarah, if you want to keep, oh, sorry, Miss Tracy had a comment. Sorry, Miss Tracy, you were on my other page.
I think the changes were pretty good, but I think it would be very helpful to put some specific limitations on size of driveway, particularly paved driveways, width off the street, because, you know, some of them are just awful.
Are you talking, and Lily Yeguazu, if you're here, I know there are some limitations on the front coverage of your lot, and that usually is aimed at driveways, so you can't pave over your entire front lot. And Lily, I don't know if you're here, if you could.
Yes, I'm
and I
here.
just don't know the exact. I know they've probably been updated since I knew them, but do you know what the requirements are for the front coverage, lot coverage?
Yes, the front coverage includes driveways and is limited to 30%, I believe, in the R2 and R3 zoning districts. So any paving within the required front yard, including driveways and any other hardscape you may have in the front yard area, is limited to 30%.
30% of the land or of the width of the property?
It's the width times the required setback, and I can double check what the required front setback is.
I think if you took 30% of a 100-foot wide property,
area,
which a lot of these are, that's an awful lot.
Yeah.
And I think it would, given some of those, I think are very, you know, I think you could have narrower driveways and maybe 2 parking spaces behind them, but I don't think you need to pave 30 feet wide of that. I think there should be some limitations if we're going to keep the community natural looking.
Mm-hmm. So it would be, and it's not the entire front yard, Lily, and I always forget the calculation, but it's from like the front edge of the house to the setback, to setback. Is that right? Or is it the minimum required minimum front yard? I forget what I'm sorry, I'm going back to my special permit days.
Yeah, I'm taking right now. I'll get you the correct dimensions.
Okay, thank you.
So that's an underlying limitation that we already have built in. And I will say too, that if you start disturbing more than a certain square footage of area that raises to a minor site plan, that would have to come to the architectural review board as well. So if you start paving over your entire front lot, that's going to be more than the limitations for minor site plans. So we've kind of got 2 regulations in place, but we'll check the exact language and see if we need to clarify that a little bit.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think we discussed the future planned edits. So the last section was the comparison. We essentially looked at the outline and contents of the DRC design guidelines, and then looked back at the draft HOD design guidelines. There are a lot of similarities between the 2 documents in the topics and concepts that they cover. We believe that they're largely complementary of each other. Both provide guidance on siting, grading, drainage, orientation, fencing and screen walls, driveways and walkways, everything that we've discussed today. So there were some comments last time about perceived differences in the DRC design guidelines, especially as it relates to the retaining walls, the driveways, the gutters, and the solar guidelines. So we just went back to the DRC design guidelines to call out what they said. You can read them here, but they're largely comparable and compatible with the HOD design guidelines. So we have a more thorough comparison. Laura, I don't know if you want to talk about anything specific, but there weren't any major conflicts between the 2 documents. I would say that the HOD design guidelines don't use must or must conform. DRC design guidelines obviously carry a bit more weight. So that was the first. And yeah, we encourage compatibility. DRC design guidelines are in some ways more restrictive and provide more exact specifications in terms of square footage, numbers of decks, patios, discouraging hot tubs on decks, specific window measurements. So, and a lot of guidance on color, which we don't have in this, in the HOD design guidelines. So I think that was.
If I could, in 70 years, the guidelines may say something about color. We have never, ever done anything about color in the DRC. Nobody comes to us and says, I want to paint my house chartreuse. And if they paint their house chartreuse, we all grin and bear it because we know that eventually they will see the light. But we have never, ever told anybody what color to paint anything.
I would say, this is Mike Miguel, I would say that you've done a good job of being consistent with the DRC guidelines. The one distinction is that the DRC reviews a number of issues which don't require county permits, and therefore are issues which you would not normally formally rule on.
That's correct. And I'm shaking my head because the ARB, for example, if you come in for your addition and you decide you want to put in a fence for some privacy or screening, that would help. Some fencing guidelines would help guide the ARB to kind of feel, what's suitable for that fence type to be. Obviously, you don't want it to be wrought iron French fence, a wrought iron fence or anything like that, or something heavy on the landscaping. So that allows them to comment on it. But for example, you don't have to get approval for fence. You don't have to get building permit approval for fencing. And that's where we're kind of running into some of these issues, because the building permit is a threshold for what the ARB can review. That's not to say if there's a special permit that allows a fence height in a front yard. So if you come in for a special permit, that's different, and you would have to come to the ARB for review because it's a type of rezoning case. So it allows the ARB to take it in the entire site conceptually and make comments on that for character. And unless you had your heart dead set on wrought iron fence, that it would be very hard to move forward without taking the ARB's guidance and comments on that. But to your point, you are right. We will not see it unless it comes in for a permit. So the permit, first of all, has to be triggered, which sometimes I know doesn't happen. But once it's triggered, it gets recognized in our mapping system that it's in a historical overlay district, and then gets sent to us to determine on whether or not it needs to go to the ARB. I mean, we can do some administrative approvals for them, but as we talked about last time, but then it gets routed to the ARB for full comment.
I have a question.
If I could just make go ahead.
I have
Millie,
a
go
question
ahead.
for Sarah. Sarah,
Sure.
did I hear you say that obviously the DRC guidelines carry more weight than the HOD guidelines? Is that what you said, Sarah?
Well, understanding that these guidelines are recommendations and not requirements, and the DRCs are more so requirements.
The DRC is a voluntary organization, and participation with it is voluntary. So
Millie,
how are they more?
Millie, we're not going to get into that discussion tonight. But
Well, but
just
the consultant is obviously under a certain conception that
I
is
think
not legally correct.
I think what she
That's
was saying is they're more strict in their use of conform, shall, and will, and the design guidelines are recommended, could, would. That's where I think she was going with that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
No, thank you. We got it on the record. Thank you.
If I could just make an observation here. It seems to me that for the good of the homeowners, that we either, perhaps not in these guidelines, but in some way, need to set out a path for a homeowner who wishes to participate in the DRC, and we can all argue about whether or not it's mandatory or not, but who is coming to the DRC and then is going to and then because of the nature of their project, must go to the ARB. What I have observed in the time that I've been on the DRC is that people generally come to the DRC before they have gone to the county, before they've sought any kind of a building permit or anything else. They sort of get their ducks in a row and get their plan set of what they want to do. And then they go to the county and see, very often people have gone to the county with a plan that the DRC has said, you can do it. It doesn't happen a lot, but yeah, we can live with this. And they go to the county and the county has some issue, and then they have to go back to the drawing board. So I just think it's important that these guidelines or somewhere we address how the homeowner works with the DRC and with the ARB, just so they have a path. We can't just dump all this on people and say to them, good luck, figure it out. Let us know what you come up with. That's not going to work and won't be accepted by the community.
We cannot include how the DRC will be involved with this process. It's incumbent upon the DRC and the Civic Association to determine how they're going to work with our process, with this process, because it's a private matter. We cannot comment on it. We can't say we require you to go to the DRC before you come to the ARB. I did look up some more. I think the example I gave last week was Reston Association. And in that case, the applicant goes to the Reston Association kind of in concurrent processing with the process coming to the Architectural Review Board. So it depends on how your group wants to incorporate this into their process of if you want them to go to the ARB first, and that would be your guidance you'd be giving to them. And of course, we could say you need to consult with the DRC, but we can't enforce that to happen.
I'm not asking you to enforce anything, but I think as between the two groups, there should be some understanding.
Right. But we cannot, being the county, we cannot comment on your process and how that works with our process. I'm not
asking you to comment on whether our guidelines, whether the DRC's or the Civic Association's design guidelines are good, bad, or indifferent, whether they should be enforced or not enforced. I just want to make somehow a clear explanation or direction to the homeowner so that they have a clear path to follow.
I agree. I want to say that for the community meeting in February or January, whenever that happens, that's something we need to have a general idea for, but we cannot determine that for the DRC. You guys are more restrictive than us, or not restrictive. You guys have different requirements than we do, and we cannot enforce that. So you're going to have to say how this is going to work in your process. That we can't tell you, and we can't tell you how to do that.
We're not asking you to tell us how to do it. I was asking if you could engage with us in a discussion about what you might think the best practices are.
I can't because the county does not, the ARB approval is not incumbent on the DRC approval. They're two completely separate processes, and the DRC would have to determine how the ARB would fit into their process.
Okay.
I just can't, for legal reasons, I can't give you any guidance on that.
Gerba's hand is up.
I think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, I hate to disagree with my esteemed neighbor, but I'm really siding with Laura. I don't think it's realistic to expect the county to make a reference to the DRC in any form. Just doesn't belong there. This is something that's going to be part of the zoning regulations. And as a result, I think it should stand on its own. It's our responsibility, really. When I was on the board and served as president of the Civic Association, people were constantly getting caught without knowing that the DRC had a role in making decisions regarding their property. And it's really incumbent upon the Civic Association to make sure that these people know that. And we should also touch base with the real estate agents and let them know that they should inform that there are possible restrictions on what the purchaser can do. So I would leave it as it is.
So I'd like to dive in here. I think, you already mentioned the DRC in your text. You mentioned in the introduction that Holland Hills has sustained its historic mid-century modern character as a result, partly of monitoring of design additions by the DRC. So it would not hurt to be descriptive, not proscriptive, descriptive of how does Holland Hills currently enforce its design review process? Who does that and why? And say that these guidelines and this process will be totally separate from that process.
I don't disagree with you, Mr. McGill. I think, though, that I need to consult with the county attorney a little bit more on what we can and can't say, specifically because we can't. It might be something like with Rest Association now is a good example. If a Reston case comes in, we usually say, we recommend you consult with the Reston Association before you get too far to ensure, you're on, the right path with them, but we can't require it. We can't say you have to. And I mean, that's a process issue, but then again, it's, I need to consult with the county attorney further about what we can put in. So I'll ask.
Yeah, I have a comment, right? It would seem to me.
Oh, Lee, I'm sorry.
Oh, am I speaking now?
No, you're fine. I just couldn't see who was speaking, so just.
Okay, it would seem to me that it would be reasonable, okay, for there to have been in the past and for there going forward in the future, a welcome wagon kind of effort on the part of the DRC. As when someone buys into this neighborhood, oftentimes, as was in my case, I was particularly interested because there was no HOA, Homeowners Association. And that's a very attractive thing. But when a homeowner buys because there's no HOA, and then after the contract is sealed and done, and thinking that they can make adjustments to their homes, and finds that there's this very strict regiment that the neighborhood association wants people to go through, why don't you just tell the realtors in the neighborhood, most of the sales are done by realtors that you all know, and ask them to invite these people to one of the DRC meetings before they seal the deal.
Can I just respond to that? Lee, there has been a complete sea change since we moved into the neighborhood. I'm now on the DRC, and I am getting emails from people saying, dear DRC, we are moving into your neighborhood in 2 months, and we'd like to know about the DRC process because we want to make sure that we're participating in it correctly. People are moving to the neighborhood because of the design review guidelines, because they're seeking out mid-century modern and they want to make sure that it is retained. So there's just been this total sea change. the people are contacting us when they move into the neighborhood. They're well aware of the guidelines.
I read the contract before I sign it. And that's only fair to give people a chance to do that. Okay, and I hear what you're saying, that very well may be true. I have no way, it's very subjective of knowing. But people who are moving into this neighborhood, when there's no HOA, deserve the opportunity to see for themselves what they're going to be getting into. So invite them to one of your meetings.
People have come to the meeting before they've moved in.
Good, keep it up.
We never say no to anybody who wants to come to a meeting.
Are there any other comments or questions for discussion to keep going? I will say, Lee, that from HODs in the county, we have trouble people knowing that they're in HOD, and we have to do continual outreach to try to get them to know that they're in a historic overlay district.
Yeah, I'd like to better understand what that outreach looks like, because in the very first group we had as a group, we talked, and I asked Lily, okay, how do people know if it's an HOD? And her response was, well, it's not that easy. It's not that well put out there. People don't know.
It is in the, it is, go ahead.
We couldn't even get visibility in the community. In the Gazette, when the Gazette has everything else that's happening in the county, but we couldn't get a little blurb about the HOD, the potential HOD. So I hear what you're saying, but the proof doesn't seem to be in what I can observe anyway.
It's not going to blame the realtors, but we have it on our county website. It's in the Department of Tax Administration information. So if you're looking at property values and things like that, it says it very clearly on the front of their website. But we have, 13 historic overlay districts, almost, if these go through, we have 2 more and 1 more, so then we'll have 16. So we have a lot of property owners, especially in yours and this one, and then in Homes Run Acres. So I'm not saying it's not going to fall through the cracks. It's just a matter of education.
No, but there are a lot of conflicting interest here. There's a conflicting interest when people don't get an appropriate home inspection. If they get an observation inspection, not an actual inspection of an older home. And, this is a buyer beware state, they say, but it's also a state that respects homeowners' rights. So there's a lot of contradictions that go on, and the homeowner is the one who gets up, ends up holding the bag sometimes.
I completely agree with you, and unfortunately, we're not going to solve that tonight. I'm taking it into account and consideration, trying to be more visible about these issues.
So Laura, I did have one question. It's Jerry.
Oh, hey, Jerry.
So I understand everything. More or less understand everything that's been said, but is there some way for the DRC and the HOD to notify each other when things come through? Not say you must do things, but just simply to notify each other when they see something so that things don't fall through the cracks.
I think we could. I think that's more of an administrative feat, but it's something we can definitely look into. It wouldn't be something we would put in, in the design guidelines or anything like that. But I think as a professional courtesy, I would hope that we could keep up the relationship between the community and the county historic overlay district. So that's definitely a good suggestion. I just don't know if we can, we can't, put it in the zoning ordinance or anything like that. That would just be a professional courtesy. We have that with, and that's the other thing too, is that, and it's kind of like code compliance works now, that, we don't live in the communities. We don't necessarily see when someone built a place in their front yard, for example. I hope nobody has one. But anyway, I'm not saying that. But that's just an example. So if something goes up and we're not out there every day driving by, it's, it's the county is actually run on a complaint basis. And so someone would have to say something, in order for, if the permit didn't come in, for example, then a neighbor would be incumbent upon the neighbor to say something and say, hey, I think this addition went up without permits. Can you come check on it? And then the county would come and check on it and pursue it appropriately. So I think that's definitely something we kind of already do with our historic overlay districts, but not something we would be able to put in specifically. But thank you for bringing that up.
That would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Is there anything else? I know it's about 8:30. And I think I think we've heard some really good comments tonight and some really, and I want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to speak about what they wanted to tonight. And then thank you all for your continued interest on this and reviewing them ahead of time. And apologize, I can't get back to you as quick as we'd like to, but thank you for, taking emails this morning and then things like that and reading through it. I know that tracers and staff really appreciate the feedback, because in the end, this is going to be your community, and we want to make sure we're on the right track. So moving forward, we have one more meeting set up for this year on December 7th. And right now I'm hoping we might not be able to get the design guidelines turned around that quickly with these comments, depending, and I'll work with Sarah on that. But if we have, we're kind of wrapping up what we would need to do with the work group outreach, and then I'm going to go back and work on the staff report. So I want to kind of open it up for the last work group meeting too, that if there's something specific you want answers to, please let me know. I don't have anything specifically for that night, but also, but I want to have it as a Q&A if there's things we need to clarify, but I'm happy to have the meeting regardless. And the other thing is that if there's anything you have more about the contributing or non-contributing properties, I know there was 1 or 2 properties that we had talked about a couple meetings ago. But if there's one you would feel that was not or was for, to let me know, or if you wanted more guidance on that. But once again, this is going to be kind of an open meeting, the last one, because I want to make sure that we have, the comments on record. We've tried to address them as best as we can. But I will say too that we're kind of getting not to the end of this process by any means, but now we need to get through finalizing some of the staff report stuff. And then you've given Sarah and Tracy some clear guidance on how we want to proceed with those. So I want to make sure we can do that. So are there any kind of closing comments or concerns or anything like that before we end?
We did not see some additions. There was going to be some discussion of some ideas about what to do instead of just pictures, or is that discussion concluded?
Pictures for
DX, don't let this happen to you.
I thought that we were going to Tracy's going to go back again and kind of crop some of the pictures so that the X's are a little bit more zoomed in, and obviously not have them. They're not all of them are going to be able to. You're going to know some of them regardless of how we crop them. But I think they're going to go back and take another stab at trying to make those less specific. Muting the colors, black and white, something like that. To like not calling out your house specifically. For those not recommended practices. And is that okay, Barbara?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. That's, I think, where we ended with that.
Laura, I'd just like to say that as we close down, that you and your staff and Traceries are doing a superb job.
I don't know how you've done it, but thank you so much.
Well, my kids in the background, run around really. Sorry, but no. If you can believe it, my daughter is now 17 years old. So we've been doing this for a while. Yeah. So, but yeah, sorry. Any other questions before we go?
Yeah, this is Bob Kinzer. I haven't made any comments tonight, but I did send you a long list of comments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, and I wanted to compliment you really on a terrific job of coming up with a good set of guidelines. I think you did a great job. And so that's all.
Thank you. I do have your email, and I will send it over to Traceries for their comments.
Okay, I think you did send it, but if anyone has additional written comments that they want to provide, please do send them over.
We're Laura, by no means, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Laura, I was gonna clarify, I did check on the front yard parcel coverage for the R2 zoning district. The R1 and R2 zoning district actually is 25%, of the front yard, not the minimum front yard. So basically, the front yard is defined as the area between the front property line and the front of the house itself. So your minimum required setback for the R2 zoning district is 30 to 35. But if the house is set back further than the 35, it includes that area. So the parcel coverage is limited to 25% of that area. And I've put it in the comments as well.
So it's even more restrictive. So now you only have a quarter if the house, so it'd be 25 feet wide instead of, okay, right.
That's still pretty wide.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not, especially with the bigger cars we have now, but yes. But that's the entire coverage. So if you have a patio or something else that extends, it's not just driveway, it's anything that is what non-pervious slowly or paved area.
That's correct.
Okay, but we'll look into that a little bit further. I think I'm frozen.
Is it
But,
paved, just paved or gravel? Is that
I believe it includes gravel. It's all surface area. It's defined as surface area.
Thank you.
I think I'm freezing. Are there any other comments? I can still hear everybody, but I can't see anybody.
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Please, as always, send me any questions and I'll route them to the right person. And I'll see you all on December 7th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you all.
Good night. Stay well, everyone.
Here.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, Laura.
Who is this? I can't see. I can only hear people. I'm frozen.
This is Kay. This is Kay.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you out.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I was looking the other way. No, that's okay. I have a question about the ARB meeting the other night. Is this an inappropriate time? Should I just call you?
Can you call me? Because I don't want it to go on this record because I'm recording this. But I'm free now. If you want to give me a call, I can give you my phone number real quick.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's 703 220 4586.
Okay. Okay. So I'll call you right now. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Talk to you in a bit.